I mean, you guys are unfortunately kind of familiar with injury updates this season, but I imagine yesterday's was probably pretty tough. Just what's the reaction been from you guys, the players, the coaches, to losing Sid and Ari?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, just brokenhearted for them. They're two really good people that you hate to see this happen to. They've been an integral part of what we've been doing, and so hate it for them. So I think now it's about playing to honor them, right, and playing for them. I think I said it early when C was out the very first time. Sometimes it can be a blessing in disguise because everybody else finds themselves, right, and no one is afraid to make the big play. Offensively or defensively. And so I think it's just, we got a really good group that's unselfish, that want to win, that play well together and for each other. And when one person doesn't have it, somebody else does. And I think it makes this really, really difficult to scout when that happens.
Stephanie White just got completely exposed for her shocking double standard when it comes to treating Caitlin Clark compared to every other player on the Indiana Fever roster. And honestly, the evidence is so damning that fans are now demanding she gets fired before she can do any more damage to this team. During today's pregame media session before the Fever's matchup against the Chicago Sky, White delivered an absolutely heartfelt and emotional response about Ari McDonald and Sydney Colson's season-ending injuries that was completely different from the cold and calculated way she talked about Caitlin Clark being injured. Earlier this season, the contrast between these two responses is so obvious and so insulting to Clark that social media has erupted with fans calling for White's immediate termination because they're sick of watching their favorite player get disrespected by her own head coach.
She's really happy Caitlin Clark's not playing. I gotta believe that at this point. How could you ever say it's a blessing in disguise to lose your best player? So they all can get confidence in doing what exactly? Do you think Sophie Cunningham without Caitlin Clark is going to be better than Sophie Cunningham with Caitlin Clark? Hell no. Sophie Cunningham is going to see so many open looks playing next to Caitlin Clark. Aaliyah Boston's game has clearly regressed without Caitlin Clark. When Caitlin doesn't play, Leah Boston doesn't typically play all that great. Lexi Hall has become virtually invisible without Caitlin Clark. I think we all know by now that Lexi Hall doesn't function unless Caitlin Clark plays. And you're sitting here saying that she is a blessing in disguise that she's injured.
We're talking about a coach who called Clark's injury a blessing in disguise while breaking down in tears over role players getting hurt. And if that doesn't prove she has it out for the league's biggest star, then nothing will. If you're absolutely disgusted by this blatant favoritism and you think Stephanie White needs to be fired immediately before she ruins Caitlin Clark's career, smash that like button and drop Fire White in the comments, because this story is about to expose just how deep this coach's bias against Clark really goes and why the Fever front office needs to make a change. The difference between White's emotional response to McDonald and Colson's injuries versus her dismissive attitude about Clark's injury is so stark that it's impossible to interpret it as anything other than deliberate disrespect toward the player who saved this franchise from irrelevance.
That doesn't even make sense. Like, blessing in disguise that Michael Jordan ain't played for freaking 15 games. Blessing in disguise that LeBron James ain't. That's ridiculous, because the second she gets back, they're going to go back into their actual role of what they're supposed to do. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise for Stephanie White because she doesn't really care for Caitlin Clark and doesn't really want to have to deal with running Caitlin Clark offense over motion bull, where Caitlin Clark isn't the focal point of the offense.
When White spoke about McDonald's broken foot and Colson's torn ACL during today's pregame media session, she opened by saying she was brokenhearted for both players and called them two really good people who are an integral part of what we've been doing. She spoke with visible emotion and emphasized how much she hates to see this happen to them, not just for their on-court impact, but for who they are as teammates and people. White stressed how much both players brought to the locker room and how their personalities and leadership will be missed for the rest of the season. Compare that heartfelt and genuine response to the way White talked about Caitlin Clark's groin injury that kept her out of multiple games earlier this season. When asked about Clark being sidelined, White said, "While we don't like that she's out, sometimes it can be a blessing in disguise because everybody else finds themselves. No one is afraid to make the big play offensively and defensively. Notice how she immediately pivoted to talking about the positives of Clark being injured instead of expressing any concern for the player who single-handedly transformed this franchise from a laughingstock into a must-watch team.
But when your team suddenly rips off a 5-game winning streak without a superstar and the coach start using phrases like blessing in disguise, you have to start reading between the lines. It's like being the star employee who goes on medical leave only to come back and find your team hit all their targets without you, and your duties have been reassigned and everyone seems just a little too happy. Do you build the company around the brilliant, rule-breaking founder? Or do you force that founder to conform to the safe, predictable corporate structure? Coach Stephanie White is known for a value in a team-first system where the ball moves and everyone contributes. Then you have Caitlin Clark. She doesn't just fit into a system, she is the system. Her talent is so massive, it fundamentally changes how the game is played.
White spoke in a cold and pragmatic tone about Clark's absence and framed it as a positive opportunity for the rest of the roster instead of acknowledging what a massive loss it was for the team. The coaching malpractice becomes even more obvious when you consider that Clark is infinitely more important to this team's success than McDonald and Colson combined. Clark is a 2-time All-Star and the player who brought unprecedented attention and revenue to the WNBA, while McDonald and Colson are role players who barely make an impact on most games. Yet White showed more genuine emotion and concern for the backup players than she did for the franchise cornerstone who made it possible for her to even have a coaching job in Indiana. That's not just bad coaching. That's a deliberate slap in the face to the player who deserves the most support and protection from her head coach. White's pattern of undermining Clark goes back to the very beginning of the season when she completely changed the offensive system that made the Fever successful during Clark's rookie year. Instead of building on the motion offense and ball movement that allowed Clark to thrive and made her teammates better, White implemented a slow and methodical system that minimized Clark's impact and made the entire team worse.
Is Stephanie White a good coach? No, she not. Stephanie Jigsaw White, because I'm mad. Look. She is incompetent as a coach. She is unintelligent. She doesn't develop players. There's a reason why those women, when she was coaching in college, had a little 2 years coaching in college with that horrible record. Those women was transferring and leaving that school and leaving her dry as they should. She's a cancer. She's just a cancer in the locker room, just in the workplace. Like, y'all can't tell me that she not sabotaging the team on purpose. You can't tell me, bro.
She brought in players like Natasha Howard, who didn't fit the playing style that made Clark and the core group successful, then had the audacity to act like Clark needed to adjust to accommodate role players instead of the other way around. The blessing in disguise comment about Clark's injury reveals White's true feelings about having to coach the league's biggest star. She clearly resents the attention and pressure that comes with coaching Clark and would prefer to work with lesser players who won't overshadow her coaching ability or question her questionable strategic decisions. White wants to be the star of the show instead of putting her ego aside and building the best possible system around the most talented player in women's basketball.
Look, Stephanie White, she have her little favorites. Coach your team. Are you trying to keep your coaching job long term, or you want to just look cool? Because right now, everything's starting to make sense to me at the end of the day. The more I watch these games and these rotations, it lets me know that she's doing this on purpose. Whoever giving her orders at top, I just need somebody to come in and just these little relationships with the presidents of the organization, whatever the case may be, the ticket holders, like they all in cahoots with each other, bro, and I don't like.
Her comments suggest that she actually enjoys the periods when Clark is injured because it allows her to implement her preferred style of play without having to worry about maximizing the talents of a generational player. The fan reaction to White's exposed double standard has been absolutely brutal and completely justified given how obvious her bias has become. Social media erupted with comparisons between her emotional response to role player injuries and her dismissive attitude about Clark's health issues. One viral post pointed out a very different answer than the one she gave about playing without Caitlin Clark, and the responses have been filled with fans demanding accountability from the coaching staff and front office. Fever fans are rightfully furious that their coach is more concerned about bench players than the superstar who brought them out of basketball obscurity. The timing of these contrasting comments couldn't be worse for White, because it comes at a moment when questions about her coaching ability are already at an all-time high. The Fever have struggled with late-game execution, blown leads, and questionable rotations throughout the season, and now fans have concrete evidence that White doesn't have the right mindset to coach a player of Clark's caliber.
I'm so tired of Stephanie White, man. Y'all wanted this woman so badly, bruh. She makes dumb decisions, man. Like, what kind of no-brainer would it be to play Chloe Bibby, one of your players that's been hot shooting, versus a team that was firing on all cylinders, bro? And you could have put her out there to match that, man, because she has a jumper. Stephanie White doesn't make any sense, man. Goofy as hell. Just stupid. Like I don't understand what she thinks, man. I'm going to play my player that's come out shooting hot for only 2 minutes for the game. No sense, man.
You can't build a championship team around a superstar when your head coach is publicly celebrating the opportunities that come from that superstar being injured. That's coaching malpractice at the highest level. What makes White's comments even more insulting is the fact that Clark has never complained about her usage, never criticized the coaching staff publicly, and has been nothing but professional despite being put in terrible positions by questionable game plans and roster construction. Clark deserves a coach who appreciates her unique talents and builds systems that maximize her impact instead of someone who views her absence as a positive development for team chemistry. The fact that White can't even fake concern for Clark's well-being while showing genuine emotion for role players proves that she's not the right person to lead this franchise moving forward. The contrast in White's responses also exposes the fake leadership narrative that the coaching staff has been pushing about other players stepping up in Clark's absence. When McDonald and Colson got injured, White talked about playing to honor them and continuing the work they helped build, which implies that their contributions were meaningful and irreplaceable. But when Clark was injured, White framed it as an opportunity for other players to find themselves and not be afraid to make big plays, which suggests that Clark's presence was actually holding teammates back. That's a completely backwards way of thinking about your best player and shows that White fundamentally misunderstands how to build a winning culture around elite talent. The economic implications of White's bias against Clark are staggering when you consider how much money Clark generates for the franchise and the league as a whole. Clark's popularity drives ticket sales, merchandise revenue, television ratings, and sponsorship deals that keep the entire WNBA financially viable, yet White treats her like an inconvenience instead of the golden goose that makes everyone's paychecks possible. The fact that White can't even pretend to be concerned about Clark's health while showing genuine emotion for players who contribute a fraction of Clark's value proves that she's completely disconnected from the proper business realities of professional sports. White's coaching philosophy seems to be stuck in an outdated mindset where stars are supposed to sacrifice their individual excellence for some mythical concept of team chemistry instead of building team chemistry around elite individual talent. This approach might work with average players, but it's a recipe for disaster when you're dealing with a generational talent like Clark who can single-handedly change the trajectory of games and seasons. The best coaches in professional sports understand how to build systems that maximize their best players' strengths while putting role players in positions to succeed within that framework. The locker room implications of White's obvious favoritism toward role players over the franchise star could be devastating for team chemistry if Clark starts to feel unsupported by her own coaching staff. Players pay attention to how coaches talk about different teammates in public, and Clark has to be wondering why her coach shows more concern for backup players than the person who made it possible for this team to be relevant in the first place. This kind of disparity in treatment can create resentment and division that undermines everything the team is trying to accomplish on the court. White's inability to properly value Clark's contributions becomes even more problematic when you consider that Clark is still early in her career and needs proper development and support to reach her full potential. Instead of nurturing the talents of a player who could dominate the league for the next decade, White is treating her like a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be maximized. This short-sighted approach could stunt Clark's development and waste the prime years of the most talented player the WNBA has ever seen. The front office's tolerance for White's obvious bias against Clark raises serious questions about their commitment to building a championship team around their franchise player. Any competent organization would immediately address a situation where the head coach is publicly showing more concern for role players than the superstar who drives all of their revenue and success. The fact that this pattern has been allowed to continue suggests that the front office either doesn't understand Clark's value or lacks the backbone to hold their coaching staff accountable for inappropriate behavior. The strategic incompetence that White has shown throughout her tenure becomes even more obvious when you consider how much better the team played under Christie Side's system that was built around maximizing Clark's unique abilities. Sides understood how to create movement and spacing that allowed Clark to be effective both on and off the ball, while White has implemented a system that minimizes Clark's impact and makes the entire offense more predictable and easier to defend. The regression in offensive efficiency and overall team performance under White's coaching should be enough to question her job security even without the obvious bias issues. The international embarrassment that White's comments create for the WNBA cannot be understated because Clark's global popularity has brought unprecedented attention to women's professional basketball. When fans around the world see the league's biggest star being disrespected by her own coach, it reflects poorly on the entire organization and undermines the credibility of women's professional sports. White's inability to properly support and promote her most valuable player sends the message that the WNBA doesn't appreciate or understand the value of the transcendent talents that could elevate the league to new heights. The comparison between White's emotional investment in role players versus her dismissive attitude toward Clark also reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of leadership and team building in professional sports. Great coaches understand that supporting and protecting your best players creates a culture where everyone feels valued and motivated to contribute at their highest level. When coaches show favoritism toward lesser players while undermining stars, it creates confusion about priorities and sends mixed messages about what kind of performance and behavior is actually valued by the organization. White's public comments about Clark being a blessing in disguise when injured also provide ammunition for opposing teams and players who might be looking for reasons to target or disrespect Clark on the court. When your own coach suggests that the team is better without you, it gives opponents permission to view you as overrated or problematic rather than the elite player who deserves respect and proper protection. This kind of undermining from within the organization can have lasting effects on how Clark is perceived and treated throughout the league. The media narrative implications of White's contrasting comments are equally damaging because they provide journalists and analysts with evidence to support negative storylines about Clark being a difficult player or chemistry. Problem: even though Clark has been nothing but professional and team-oriented throughout her career, White's suggestion that her absence creates opportunities for teammates implies that her presence somehow limits other players' development or confidence. This narrative could follow Clark for years and affect how she's perceived by future coaches, teammates, and organizations. The developmental damage that White's coaching approach could cause to Clark's career trajectory is perhaps the most concerning aspect of this entire situation. Clark is still early enough in her professional career that proper coaching and support could help her reach even higher levels of excellence, but White's system and attitude seem designed to constrain rather than unleash Clark's full potential. The difference between maximizing a generational talent and wasting their prime years often comes down to having coaches who understand how to build around elite abilities rather than trying to minimize them for the sake of false team chemistry. The urgency for the Fever front office to address this coaching situation cannot be overstated because every game that White continues to undermine and misuse Clark is a missed opportunity to build toward championship contention. Clark's peak years are precious and limited, and the organization has a responsibility to surround her with coaches and teammates who appreciate her value and are committed to maximizing her impact on winning basketball games. White's obvious bias and strategic incompetence represent obstacles to that goal that need to be removed immediately if the Fever are serious about building a sustainable winning culture. The fan revolt that has erupted in response to White's exposed double standard proves that the paying customers who support this franchise are not going to tolerate continued disrespect of their favorite player. Season ticket holders, merchandise buyers, and television viewers invest their time and money because they want to see Clark succeed And they're rightfully furious when the coaching staff treats her like a secondary priority compared to role players. The front office needs to listen to their customer base and make the coaching change that will restore confidence in the organization's commitment to building around their franchise cornerstone. The bottom line is that Stephanie White has proven through her own words that she doesn't have the right mindset or priorities to coach a player of Caitlin Clark's caliber and importance. Her emotional investment in role players combined with her dismissive attitude toward the franchise star creates an untenable situation that can only be resolved through immediate coaching change. The Fever organization needs to decide whether they want a coach who celebrates Clark's absence or one who understands that their success depends entirely on maximizing the talents of the most important player in women's basketball history. The most frustrating part about White's obvious bias is that we have concrete examples of coaches who know how to properly handle superstar players and build championship cultures around elite talent. Look at how Eric Spoelstra coached LeBron James in Miami, or how Steve Kerr maximized Stephen Curry's unique abilities in Golden State. These coaches understood that their job was to create systems that unleashed their stars' full potential while putting role players in positions to contribute meaningfully within that framework. White is doing the exact opposite by trying to minimize Clark's impact and treating her like a problem to be solved rather than a weapon to be deployed. The psychological damage that White's coaching approach is inflicting on Clark could have lasting effects that extend far beyond just this season. When your own coach publicly suggests that the team functions better without you, it creates doubt and frustration that can affect confidence and performance for years to come. Clark is still young enough in her career that this kind of undermining from authority figures could fundamentally change how she approaches the game and interacts with future coaching staffs. The Fever organization has a responsibility to protect Clark's mental health and development, and keeping White in place is a direct violation of that responsibility. What makes White's bias even more inexcusable is that Clark has consistently shown the kind of leadership and professionalism that coaches dream about working with. She's never called out teammates publicly, never complained about her usage despite being misused constantly, and has taken responsibility for team failures even when the coaching decisions were clearly at fault. Clark has bent over backward to make White's system work despite it being completely wrong for her skill set, yet White still can't show the basic respect and concern that she demonstrates for players who contribute a fraction of Clark's value to the organization. The comparison to how other successful coaches have handled similar situations makes White's approach look even more ridiculous and outdated. When Phil Jackson coached Michael Jordan, he didn't try to minimize Jordan's impact or celebrate when he was absent from games. He built the triangle offense specifically to maximize Jordan's abilities while creating opportunities for role players to contribute within that system. When Greg Popovich coached Tim Duncan in San Antonio, he didn't frame Duncan's injuries as blessings in disguise. He built the entire organizational culture around supporting and protecting his franchise cornerstone, while developing role players who understood their job was to help the star succeed. The financial implications of White's mismanagement become even more staggering when you project the long-term effects of her coaching approach on Clark's career trajectory and the franchise's revenue potential. If White's system and attitude cause Clark to plateau or regress instead of reaching her full potential, the Fever could lose hundreds of millions of dollars in future revenue from tickets, merchandise, sponsorships, and media deals. The opportunity cost of wasting even 1 year of Clark's prime under incompetent coaching is enormous, and the front office's failure to address this situation immediately represents a massive dereliction of their fiduciary duty to the organization and its investors. The competitive implications are equally devastating because the WNBA playoff race is incredibly tight and every game matters for determining postseason positioning and home court advantage. White's inability to maximize Clark's talents and her obvious bias against the team's best player could be the difference between a championship run and an early playoff exit. When you have a generational talent like Clark on your roster, every season represents a championship opportunity that can't be wasted on coaching experiments and personality conflicts that could be resolved with proper leadership from the front office. The precedent that the Fever organization is setting by tolerating White's bias against Clark sends a terrible message to other star players around the league about how they can expect to be treated if they sign with Indiana. Free agents and trade candidates pay attention to how organizations handle their superstars, and the current situation suggests that the Fever front office lacks the backbone to protect their players from inappropriate coaching behavior. This reputation could hurt the franchise's ability to attract top talent for years to come and limit their championship potential even after Clark's prime years are over. The media coverage of White's contrasting comments has already started to create national storylines about dysfunction within the Fever organization that reflect poorly on everyone involved. ESPN analysts and other major media personalities are starting to question whether Indiana is the right environment for Clark to reach her full potential, and these narratives can become self-fulfilling prophecies if they're allowed to persist. The Fever need to get ahead of this story by making the coaching change that demonstrates their commitment to building around Clark instead of allowing the situation to fester and generate more negative publicity. The international ramifications of this coaching controversy extend far beyond just the WNBA because Clark's global popularity has made her an ambassador for women's sports and American basketball around the world. When international fans see Clark being disrespected by her own coach, it reflects poorly on the entire women's professional sports movement and could damage the credibility that the WNBA has built through Clark's success. The organization has a responsibility to the broader women's sports community to properly support and showcase their most marketable star instead of allowing coaching bias to undermine her impact and influence. The development comparison between Clark's trajectory under different coaching approaches is stark and should be alarming to anyone who cares about maximizing her potential. Under Christie Side's system that was built around Clark's strengths, she won Rookie of the Year, made the All-Star team, and helped transform the Fever from irrelevant to must-watch television. Under White's system that minimizes Clark's impact and treats her absence as positive, the team has regressed offensively and Clark's individual numbers have declined despite her obvious improvement as a player. This pattern proves that coaching approach matters enormously for elite players and that White's methods are actively holding back a generational talent. The urgency of this situation cannot be overstated because every day that White remains in charge represents another opportunity for her bias and incompetence to cause lasting damage to Clark's career and the franchise's championship potential. The WNBA season is short and every game matters, which means that the front office can't afford to wait until the offseason to address a coaching situation that is clearly not working. The players, fans, and organization deserve better than a coach who openly celebrates when their best player is unavailable and shows more concern for role players than the superstar who made their success possible. The solution to this coaching crisis is obvious and should be implemented immediately before any more damage is done to Clark's development and the team's championship aspirations. The Fever need to hire a coach who understands how to build around elite talent, appreciates Clark's unique abilities, and has the emotional intelligence to properly support and develop a generational player. There are qualified candidates available who would jump at the chance to coach the most popular player in women's basketball, and the front office's failure to make this change represents organizational malpractice at the highest level. The fan investment in this situation goes far beyond just basketball because Clark represents hope and inspiration for millions of people who have supported women's sports for decades without seeing this level of mainstream success and recognition. When fans see their hero being undermined by her own coach, it feels like a personal betrayal of everything they've invested emotionally and financially in supporting this team and this league. The Fever organization has a moral obligation to these fans to provide Clark with the coaching support she needs to reach her full potential and deliver the championship that everyone is working toward. The legacy implications of how the Fever handle this coaching situation will be felt for decades because Clark's prime years represent a once-in-a-generation opportunity to elevate women's professional basketball to unprecedented heights. If White's bias and incompetence cause this opportunity to be wasted, it will go down as one of the worst organizational failures in professional sports history. Conversely, if the front office makes the right coaching change and builds the proper support system around Clark, this could be the foundation for a dynasty that changes women's sports forever. The choice is obvious and the time for action is now.